Hi, my name's Dr Adam Booth and this is another online episode of Quantum Source. Now, this week on Quantum Source we are remembering the 5th of Novembering. It's Bonfire Night, and at Bonfire Night what could be more traditional and healthy than to build an effigy of another human being, chuck it on the bonfire and celebrate and cheer as it burns, hey! I'm of course talking about Guy Fawkes. It was the crimes of Guy Fawkes that really inspired a lot of our Bonfire Night traditions. But was he really all that guilty of those crimes? Certainly his confession was tortured out of him, and then he was executed, maybe before the truth would really out. And there's also some theories that suggest that he might have been framed. So, how would we perceive those crimes? How would we try Guy Fawkes in a modern day court of law? And it's this question that I'm going to be putting to today's speaker. She is Dr Lily Hamourtziadou. She is a senior lecturer in the School of Social Sciences at Birmingham City University. And her research looks at sort of international peace, humanitarian efforts, and the law associated with international relations. So, I'll be giving her a bell in just a second. However, as with all quantum sources, there's a recommended source for this particular set of fascinating facts, and what I'm recommending is some Trinidadian punch and rum. Now, why Trinidadian punch and rum? Well, if you look here, it says not less than 75% alcohol. And by the letter of the law, that means that this technically classes as a fuel. So if you're looking for something to get your bonfire started, then this is maybe the source for you. So you get yourself something nice and I'll give Lily a bell. Cheers. And good afternoon, Lily. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm looking forward to a few kind of barbaric bonfire night celebrations this week. So actually, before we get into your research and our question about the trial of Guy Fawkes, obviously you've been in the UK for several years now, and how do you perceive bonfire nights? Like, how is it perceived internationally? Is it barbaric or what?
Well, I'm not sure that it is actually known internationally. I never heard of Bonfire Nights until I came to the UK in 1989.
Okay.
And for a long time, all I knew about it was that it was a fun night where, you look forward to the fireworks, like any celebration.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize there were some negative associations with the event.
There's a slightly darker aspect to it that obviously we're going to touch on in the next half hour or so. Before we do that then, recommend me a source for bonfire night. What are you going to be enjoying safely around the bonfire?
Well, I have already started enjoying it, but I will continue. And it is this lovely Greek sweet and strong wine called Mavrodaphne, which I would recommend.
All right, great. Well, everyone, keep your eyes out for some Mavrodaphne. And I hope I did the pronunciation justice there.
Perfect.
Great. Now, speaking of justice, that's a good link, isn't it? Obviously, a lot of your research focuses on international justice, international relations. Could you just set the scene for us about what's really involved with your research?
So international relations involves mainly the behavior of states. So how do states behave towards each other when they go to war or when they form international institutions such as the UN, when they form alliances, for reasons of trade or economic reasons, and so on. So it's state behavior and what it is that drives it. Why do states behave in the way that they do? Why does a state go to war against another? And there are theories trying to explain state behavior in a way in order to help us develop strategies to deal with, say, aggressive states.
Yeah, okay.
But then state behavior has big impact on international security, on national security, personal security. So these are very real issues for all of us. And when we try to understand an action or a policy of a state, in a way we try to see where we are in terms of our own security.
Okay. So, and how has that developed through time? Obviously, around the time of Guy Fawkes, the world's a very different place with a very different perception of what represents diplomacy and international policy. How have things moved on?
Things have moved on in an important way in the 20th century. After the Second World War, during the Second World War, the United Nations was formed, as well as international courts to try bad behavior by states. So in a way, the point was we developed this concept of human rights. Every person has the right to life, for example, wherever they live, and the state is not allowed to violate that right.
Sure.
And therefore now we have laws that actually say, no, this state behavior is wrong. So potentially what England did to Guy Fawkes and the other conspirators, in theory, this shouldn't be allowed now.
Right.
Because we have laws governing this kind of state behavior and violation of the rights of its citizens.
Sure. So we want to return to the idea about whether the English state acted legally. But let's first off, let's go with the Guy Fawkes story. So he was arrested on a trial of on a charge of high treason. Does that seems like a very archaic term to me? And does that still exist today?
It does, but most likely, if he was arrested today for trying to blow up Parliament, a charge of terrorism would have been brought against him, which is not dissimilar to the charge of treason, because they're both crimes against the state.
Sure.
So the state needs to punish crimes committed against it. So a charge of terrorism most likely would have been brought, and looking at obviously not death. There's no death penalty anymore, but potentially a life sentence.
Okay, but it seems that in back in medieval times, around the sort of era of Guy Fawkes, that you could commit treason just almost as a thought crime, and that's maybe something that we don't have today. Like you can think bad things about the state, but that's very different than actually doing something about those bad thoughts against the state.
Yes, that is correct. For example, I may disagree with the state policy.
Yeah.
And be open about it in my class when I'm teaching. I can tweet about it, and I won't necessarily be arrested and charged with a crime.
Yeah.
So in a sense, that state that England was then was very similar to what we understand now as a dictatorship.
Sure.
Because dictatorship is not open to political pluralism.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you disagree with the dictator, you're looking at jail time or potentially death.
Right. And we all know that, kings of England could be pretty fickle individuals. So you might find yourself on the right side of the law one day and on the wrong side of the law the next day. So it's kind of difficult to know where you stand. There's no consistency.
Yes, that is correct. In the same way that a dictator may decide he can tolerate you one day, but then change his mind. I think actually it's better if I take this guy out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Better for me. So
yeah. The other thing I was thinking was that obviously, I understand how Guy Fawkes would be perceived as a terrorist, but he was almost, he was given a death sentence. He was tortured, almost as if he'd committed the terrorist act. But of course, he didn't. He didn't blow up Parliament. He was foiled. And so I wonder if there's a difference there as well, like a thought crime, or there's a difference between the act of doing something and planning to do something.
In a way that there is no difference, because even the thought process that went into deciding to carry out an act, even if unsuccessful, is still important to the state to make an example of. Okay. So you use that motivation in a way that you want as a state or as a ruler to create an other within your country. A sort of homegrown terrorism in the way that we understand it now. So you say, these are the dangerous people in our community, they're not one of us, and then you boost your national identity in the process and you identify the enemy. And that is very important for states to do, whether you have a dictator or a legally elected government. That is true for all nations, in fact. So in that sense, it didn't really matter that he wasn't successful. He could be used in the same way. As an example, to create a particular narrative around how evil he was, that he wanted to commit this act. How dangerous, and that people who think like him are also dangerous and may need to be arrested or thrown out of the country, or we need to tell on them. And so on.
Which is, again, it seems to me to be sort of like quite quite a risky business, because you do end up kind of making an example of a particular group of people, and I imagine that gets into some quite dark places quite quickly.
It can do, but it also comes from a dark place, because that group of people is not an accidental group of people.
Yeah.
It's a particular group of people that has a grievance and is therefore acting against the state because it sees the state as exploiting a group of people, or oppressing or persecuting, and therefore they do have an ideology and a justification. It's not just any group.
Yeah.
So it's already an identified enemy that needs to be further solidified as an enemy, established as an enemy. But they do come from a dark place, because if we look at the Catholics around that time, they were indeed persecuted.
Absolutely.
And in fact, all insurgent groups like this one, they have some grievance. They are anti-elite, and they always are against a center of power that they want to remove and replace with something that they see as better, as more fair perhaps, or as better morally if it's a religious group. So there is already a dark place where the story begins.
Sure. I wonder to what extent that kind of narrative that the state wanted to develop, how much that actually played a part in the perception of Guy Fawkes' guilt as well. Because the other thing I'd say is that the familiar story goes was that Guy Fawkes was found in the cellar with a whole load of barrels of gunpowder. Yet there always seems to be just this assumption of his guilt straight away. Now, presumably, if I was Guy Fawkes, I'd be saying, no, I know nothing about this. I just found myself here, or even that I'm trying to take these barrels away. I don't want to blow up Parliament. But it seems that there's circumstantial evidence that linked him to that scene, and I wonder how we go about actually trying that.
Most likely, that wouldn't need to be tried in this case, because by and large, insurgents don't deny, in a sense, their guilt. If you look at the Islamic State, for example, they post videos of themselves executing people. So in a way, it is in their interest to publicize their cause through even violent events. So probably Guy Fawkes would not have, he may not have given other names,
sure,
but as far as his own guilt, probably he would have said, yes, this is what I wanted to do, and these are my reasons why.
Obviously, I am nowhere near as committed to the cause as Guy Fawkes was, so...
I suppose not. But they tend to...
found my particular grievance.
Well, what I haven't mentioned is that I have another, job that I do. I work for Iraq Body Count, and I'm a casualty recorder. That has involved documenting civilian deaths in Iraq since 2003 on a daily basis. And unfortunately, as part of that, I have to read terrorist websites and access them and look at videos just to see if there are civilians I can enter whose death we don't know yet, but I can enter into the database. And they are very open about what they do. Very open, without any apology, of course, because to them, this is the way forward to achieve their cause.
Yeah, there's some kind of higher calling in there.
Yes. Yes,
sure.
And that would have been for Guy Fawkes as well, because, he wasn't just a random person. He had spent time in Spain, and, he was clearly pro-Spain and pro-Catholicism, and Spain was an enemy state.
Absolutely.
This is a traitor.
I guess it becomes easy to be pro-Catholicism when, like Guy Fawkes, when you're a Catholic and the state is going around persecuting Catholics. It's not just sort of saying that, we would like to reduce the percentage of our citizens who are Catholic. They're actually going around persecuting and burning Catholics. And so actually, when you put it like that, it becomes easier to have some sympathy with Guy Fawkes and his cause.
Well, I probably would have some sympathy. I'm neither Catholic nor Protestant, but it doesn't actually matter. But it is always, when you get over that sort of standard narrative of who is good and who is evil in any conflict, and you actually delve into both sides, as I said, motives, why you go to war, why there is conflict, you find there is a lot more than just an evil group against a nice group of people. And you often find that the motivations on both sides, both the state and the non-state actor, are very similar. Their ideologies are very similar. What they want is very similar. They both want power and control. And the dominant narrative that says whose side we should be on is usually that of the state.
Okay. Just because the
once you know that, you stop accepting the state narrative as the truth that can't be challenged. And you can actually begin to have some sympathy for the other side.
Now, it's interesting you say that in all likelihood, by today's analogues, Guy Fawkes would likely have just confessed to the crime. But then, of course, he was tortured. And I've seen things like where they were trying to get him to sign a confession. I've seen these comparisons of Fawkes' signature before he was tortured and then after. And he looks like a completely ruined man as far as his ability to sign this document goes. So was there a degree of sort of sadism on the part of the state, or was he? Does it point towards him genuinely resisting the confession?
So he may not have resisted the confession exactly. He may have resisted giving names of other conspirators. I personally know people from Turkey who were held and tortured back in the 1980s by the state. They were student activists. And they were tortured a lot, and they were tortured primarily because they wouldn't give other names of other people. So I know that is a big reason why they torture. But it could also be, you say sadism here, that is the state sadistic. That could in fact have been part of his punishment. He would have been tortured anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Perhaps. I know torture, I mean, now it's not supposed to be used, it's illegal, it's one of these crimes against civilians. But torture is still used in Iraq, for example. In Iraq, we have a very high percentage of terrorism, very, very high. And therefore, the state makes daily arrests of people that are charged with terrorism, and a lot of them die of torture in prison. Although they have the death penalty and they will be executed, but they don't even make it that far because they torture them to death. So,
which just seems to be completely beside the point, and that's when it looks to that's when it seems sadistic. That you know, if you're trying to get a confession or some information out of somebody, don't torture them to the point of killing them. Otherwise, you might have well just killed them in the first place.
Yes, or you may end up getting the wrong information from them, because some people will just say anything so the torture stops. You know, we have incidents in Iraq, for instance, where airstrikes go completely wrong. You know, you think you are bombing an area where there is a group of terrorists, it turns out it was a school, let's say. The problem is, where do you get your intelligence from? How do you know if that is a school or if this is where the terrorists are? And a lot of the information is gained through torture. They arrest people and they torture them to say where are the terrorists hiding, and it could be that the person doesn't actually know. But because they're tortured, they have to say something to not be tortured anymore, and they just give some wrong information, and it ends up, you know, with devastating consequences. So torture is used in a strange way, actually, and counterproductive most of the time.
I mean, quite aside from the fact that it's not a way to treat another human being, when it turns out to be unreliable as well, then you've got to wonder what even the point is, if there's even a point.
Yes, so even if you think that, okay, it is illegal, but sometimes, you know, the utilitarian view, if it can lead to saving more lives, you can torture one person, say, to save 1,000 people. But when you look at torture itself, you can make an innocent person tell you things they don't know about, and you don't even save 1,000 people at the end. You end up, you know, killing children in a school because you bombed the wrong area.
And when no one is there fact-checking it, and when no one is there is considering that this is potentially unreliable information, you get devastating consequences like that.
It is unreliable, it is illegal, and a lot of the time, I mean, I think some of those torturers perhaps enjoy it because they see it as some kind of revenge on an evil person. Because
Sure, yeah.
who would be a terrorist? An evil person.
Yeah.
And therefore you get a kick out of causing them suffering.
Sure. Wow, this this has gone deep into international relations. As you alluded to earlier, you know, it's possible that you know, it wouldn't just be Guy Fawkes seen as a criminal in a modern court. There could also be some challenge to the English state as it was at the time. So that is then the international community looking back at that particular state. So as much as we could say that Guy Fawkes was committing terrorist acts, do you think it's do you think there's a likelihood that the English government would have found themselves in the international court?
If there existed one at the time.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But if we bring it forward into the future, then they were committing genocide.
Yes, it is very unlikely, despite the fact that there are laws about war crimes, because the British state has been involved in various war crimes since I've been doing my work for Iraq Body Count. I mean, if we think of the 3,000 civilians killed in the States on 9/11, 2001 as a crime against civilians, I can tell you through my work that the British-American Alliance coalition, in the initial bombing of Iraq in 2003, killed 7,500 civilians.
Okay.
But no one has ever been held accountable for those crimes or been called evil for killing those civilians. So I doubt very much Britain would be facing any charges, or any ruler, whether it be Tony Blair or, you know, somebody else.
Yeah, which is a really sobering thought, and there's actually, you know, yeah.
That is because, I'll tell you what, the main reason this happens is because we have, in a way, decided that the state kills legitimately, but other groups don't. So if Al-Qaeda blows up the Twin Towers and kills 3,000 people, you know, that is illegitimate. But if America then bombs Afghanistan or Iraq and kills thousands of civilians, well, that is legitimate violence because a state has gone to war to protect itself. Some kind of interest that it has. And so that in itself legitimizes the violence used.
Wow, so this has gone really quite deep into the darker parts of international security and international relations, but I guess you can't have these conversations without dealing with issues like that. But if we look forward to it, then Guy Fawkes, obviously he has a particular legacy in the UK. How are people who had the equivalent fate to Guy Fawkes, how are they still perceived in the future in different countries?
Well, can you just say something about his legacy? I mean, you say it's negative. I'm not sure it is negative because we kind of celebrate it with fireworks. That's almost like we are saying, yeah, Guy Fawkes. I mean, I can't imagine, for example, anywhere down the line having a celebration about Osama bin Laden and when he died. Simply because you don't associate such a dark figure with fireworks.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
It's like an evening out, you know, and so in a way, he has come down, he's a bit of a villain, but nothing very serious, like we would understand a terrorist figure now. So a historical figure rather than a negative one.
Yeah. Is that like sort of dampened through time, though? Because you think in the immediate aftermath, then maybe there was a sense of... well, coming back to the revenge argument, whereas now it's seen as a celebration. So it's just been kind of dampened down through time.
Time is one factor, but the other factor is that the Catholics are no longer seen as the enemy.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
Because now there are other villains, other groups. And therefore that has now become something that used to be, you know, dangerous in the past, but is no longer. And therefore we don't need to demonize him anymore.
Sure.
Now we demonize other people who are immediate dangers.
Yeah, and now it's okay for kids to throw this effigy of Guy Fawkes on the fire because it's now just a bit of fun.
Yes.
But actually you peel back a few layers and you find that what was going on there actually still has resonances today, and some really serious resonances that we all live with.
Yes, and the reason why that can happen is because, as I was saying in the beginning, the way states behave, is important in the context in which they behave that way. So the alliances they form, the enmities they have, and those change. They're not eternal. So somebody that was an enemy at some point is no longer an enemy, and
right.
Someone who was a friend before, who was shaking hands with the dictator, all of a sudden he's an enemy, and we have to, bomb his country. Because interests change. And once we get that as interests change, these relationships change, and that's pretty much all there is to it. In all our ideas of good and evil, it's just changing relationships.
Sure, yeah.
In the end, and when we get that, we stop trying to find the ultimate truth about who was right and who was wrong. Was Guy Fawkes right, or was he wrong?
Yeah.
So I think in future, at least this is what I teach my students. Whenever baddies turn up or heroes turn up, have that in mind, that this is about relationships and how we think, what morality we put on something.
Yeah, sure.
How we guide our action perhaps is completely constructed and there's no essence to it as such. So always ask questions.
Sure. Always ask questions. That's a good message from this source. It always seems to me at the moment that the world is still quite a volatile place, despite having agencies like the United Nations, which were set up to try and smooth over the cracks in these international relations. Is that the way you perceive it, or do you think that we are moving towards a more stable time?
I don't think we're moving towards a more stable time, despite the fact that, nearly 100 years ago, the UN was established to bring stability globally and peace. That was the point, to bring peace. And I don't know that I can count the wars we've had since 1945.
Absolutely, yeah.
Even this country has been involved in some conflict or other since 1945, almost non-stop. And therefore, no, I don't see at all us moving towards a more peaceful time.
So a lot of this is actually quite sobering, but of course people are going to be celebrating tonight. They're going to be enjoying bonfire night, social distancing notwithstanding. What would you say to them when they are celebrating then?
I think there's nothing wrong with celebrating bonfire night. I do. It's a nice way to get together with people that maybe you haven't seen in a while, with your neighbors. It's good, and you're not hurting anybody by celebrating bonfire night. And in a way, I would like that to be the message. Enjoy your life and the good things about your life, but try not to hurt anybody. If you're not hurting anybody, you're doing something right.
All right.
And if you can make your life about maybe helping other people or making them less miserable, then that's good.
All the better. And I hope that Quantum Source in its own small way does just that. But, the work that you're doing is obviously enormously important. So thank you very much for everything that you do and all the contributions that you make.
Well, thank you for acknowledging this. I have to continue, as sobering as it is, because I actually do care about people who are suffering, and hopefully I can make more people aware of what is happening, and they will care as well. Absolutely.
Cool. I think we'll leave you to your evening and your bonfire plans, your glass of sauce. But what I would say is that if anyone has any questions for Lily, then they can find her at on Twitter. I'll have tweeted her from the Quantum Source Twitter account, so do look her up and indeed put any questions to Lily. I'm sure you'd be happy to take them.
I'll be very happy to take them. I ask a lot of questions myself, so I love questions.
All right, we'll see if we can feed some back then. With that though, Lily, we'll say good evening to you and thank you very much.
Good evening and cheers.
So thanks very much to Lily for that food for thought. What's the verdict? I think there's an uncomfortable grey fuzzy area between the crimes of Guy Fawkes on one hand and the crimes of the state on the other. Uncomfortable because that stuff seems to be going on continually in the world today. However, one thing that I have absolutely no grey fuzziness about is the awe and respect that I have for Lily. Just the cheerfulness and the resilience that she shows despite doing all that quite traumatic research is really quite astounding. So thanks very much to Lily. You heard it from Lily as well. Go out and enjoy your Bonfire Night celebrations. Just keep in mind where they all come from and the resonances with society today. If you enjoyed that Quantum Source, then keep your eyes peeled on the Twitter and Instagram feeds. There are loads of other videos uploaded there to keep you educated and entertained. Just remains for me to say that I've been Dr Adam Booth. This has been Quantum Source. You've been great. Stay cool.